Hi, and welcome to this edition of ThePrint Crosshairs, the program at ThePrint, where we take a close look at the big geopolitical or strategic story of the week. I'm honored today to be joined by Professor Uri Bar-Joseph, who is author of many books, including the Watchman, a fantastic examination of the Israeli War of 1973, and also The Angel, which many of our viewers will have seen in Netflix. I recommend you read the book instead, which I found a lot more fun. Professor, my first question, going to the tragic events now happening in Israel. The lot of comparison in the media and elsewhere about these events with the war of 1973, where also Israel was taken by surprise. But if we look through military history, nation states often seem to be taken by surprise. You can go back all the way to Stalin before Operation Barbarossa, who refused to listen to his own spies. Many examples through history. Why are nation states and big intelligence services so often unable to understand the threat that in retrospect looks to historians was right before their eyes?
Well, this is a very big question, and I won't give a lecture now about it. I teach it in courses again and again for the last 40 years. But I would say the sources might be either lack of good information about the incoming threat, or a bad interpretation of the threat, or political pressure that compels the intelligence officers to assess the threat in a different way, not the way they think it is. They think it is and we can look at each of the big surprises of the 20th century. We start with Barbarossa, where the Soviets had a lot of information about the incoming German attack, but Stalin refused to believe that this is an attack, and refused to accept, and he even threatened, even killed intelligence officers who told him it is war, and they knew that if they tell him it is war, they will be executed, so they didn't tell him it's a war. This was a political source of intelligence failure. In Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Americans simply didn't know where the Japanese fleet is, the Japanese fleet that went to Pearl Harbor, and they had no clue that the target of Japan in starting the war would be the fleet in Pearl Harbor. So they prepared for many possibilities, but not for an attack on Pearl Harbor. The Israeli case in 1973, which is the third big surprise attack, is neither of these cases. The Israelis had excellent information about the Egyptian deployment for war, about the Syrian deployment for war, about the Egyptian and the Syrian plans of war. We received excellent warning about the intention of both Egypt and Syria to launch war. And the only problem was that several high-ranking intelligence officers adhered to the conception that Egypt and Syria won't go to war because they are too weak. They are not ready to go to war. And therefore, they didn't provide the intelligence warning that was required, and Israel was caught on surprise.
So circumstances then, I mean, I note in your book, you argue that actually the individuals in 73 played a much bigger role. There's much argument in the literature that it was in fact hubris which set in after 67, expectation, of quick and easy victory. But you argued that it was actually the individuals concerned who were key. So a lesson to leaders from then, that be very careful about the people you choose.
Precisely. At least in the Israeli case in 1973, if we had the former director of military intelligence, who was the person who was in charge of national estimate, he was a very cautious person, a very modest person, an excellent analyst. And had he served as the director of military intelligence on October 6, 1973, my guess is, we all assume the same, that there won't be any surprise. He would have given the warning long before the war started.
One of the points you've made in a recent article, Professor, was I think would be very fascinating to an Indian audience. And you said that every military is ultimately as good as its enemies in the final analysis. One of the things we've seen with the Israeli military over many years now is a growing commitment to what are essentially or conventionally policing tasks, where you have military units committed to maintaining law and order. Would it be fair to say from the Israeli case that this kind of commitment has degraded the conventional military capability of the armed forces?
I would say so. Take, for example, not the Israeli army, but take the Soviet army, the Red Army in Second World War. It started the war with very poor performances. And he fought against the best army in the war, the German Wehrmacht. And towards the end of the war, the performance of the Soviet army were excellent. It learned during the war how to improve it. The same holds true for the Americans. Now, the opposite happens with the IDF. The IDF, Israel has, over the years, built up an excellent army. In 1973, in the War of Yom Kippur, 50 years ago, it was, in my mind, the best army that Israel had ever had. But since 1987, when the Palestinians started what we call the Intifada, the rising, first popularizing, then a terrorist rising, most of the efforts of the Israeli army are devoted to policing the situation in the West, first in the West Bank and Gaza, and then after we got out of Gaza in 2003, in the West Bank, to protect settlements, to accompany Orthodox Jews who go to pray here, who go to pray there. These are not the missions that an army should do. This is not the way to prepare for war. And I don't say that the Israeli army doesn't prepare for war. Of course, it prepares, but much of its energy, intellectual energy, combat energy, training energy goes to these missions, and this reduces and builds up a spirit of an army which puts on higher priorities the protection of children and kids in the West Bank, and rather than Israeli borders against the Hamas.
As I said, interesting parallel in India, where for many years now, military commanders themselves have cautioned against the deployment of our armed forces in theaters like Kashmir or in the Northeast, and have wanted police forces to be strengthened so they can take this load instead. But funnily, politicians very reluctant to make this decision because nobody wants to be the political leader who pulled out the army and then something bad happened. I guess there are similar considerations at work in Israel as well.
Yes, and we don't have enough police to do the job. We need the police in in what we call Israel proper or the Israel pre-1967 borders, there is a lot of pressure. And Israel takes very seriously any casualties. So when a Jewish child is hurt from I don't know, shooting or anything in the West Bank among the settlers, it becomes a huge problem. So the army invests more and more forces in the West Bank. And we saw it also precisely a week ago when the Hamas attack started. It started against Israeli kibbutzim settlements, within Israel, not in the West Bank, not in Gaza, not in the occupied territories. And there was hardly any military forces ready to participate in this war, because most of the forces, about 80% of the forces, were in the West Bank.
A follow-up question to that. I mean, one of the big things that's happened in Israeli thinking about its border was the development of the border fence. And we've had this in India also, this belief that if you fence off the border, you will significantly deter intruders. India, like Israel, has spent a great deal of money on sensors and all sorts of fancy technology. Do you think it's possible that having these large static defenses sometimes makes militaries overconfident about their borders in technology and too easy to think that they can then reduce human presence on guarding their borders? Again, in history, going all the way back to the Maginot Line.
Yes, I think so. I think that the main goal of the fence in Gaza was to protect against small terrorist groups that will attempt to go into Israel and conduct terrorist acts. And against small terrorist groups, these fence and these means are okay. In fact, I think that the main, I don't know if you want to go into the sources of the intelligence failure in this case, and we don't know enough. Defense by itself is not a source of the problem. Yes, it depended more to protect against small excursions, etc. But there were enough means to provide a warning about a large-scale attack as well, and this didn't work. We know for fact three things. First, that the Hamas prepared for a year or more than a year a large-scale attack against Israel, and this involved hundreds of people who knew the secret. Second, that Israel understood that the attack starts only when the Hamas crossed the border and starts occupying the civilian settlements in Israel. And third, this means that there was a huge gap between the excellent means of collection that Israel has in Gaza and the information that they provided. We had excellent means and no information. And in my mind, here lies the main source of the intelligence failure. Because if it's only 5-10 terrorists who want to conduct a small terrorist act, fine. Maybe you won't know about it. But here we have an attack, an offensive prepared for a long time, lots of training, lots of preparations, hundreds of people involved, and the Israel Security Service, the Shabak, did not provide, as far as we know, any good warning about it. And basically, it is a failure of human collection of humans. The Shabak sources, and there's excellent sources in Gaza, didn't provide the warning. Then there are the technical issue of all the mechanisms that were supposed to collect. I mean, SIGINT and VISINT means that we're
Right.
supposed to collect information, but basically it should have come from human, not from VISINT and not from SIGINT. I don't know what happened here.
As you say, judging from past examples in history, it's entirely possible the intelligence was there, but the ability to interpret or correctly assess that intelligence was not.
I'm not so sure about it. My guess is Israel is aware of the threat of Hamas. And you needed only one piece of good information regarding the preparations to put a Hamas all-offensive war against Israel, all-out offense against Israel on the higher level of orders of priorities of the intelligence. And my guess is that it stood at a very low rank in this order of priorities because there were no warning signals, because there were no warnings from human sources. And it is very different from any other. In this sense, it is seen close to Pearl Harbor. Like the Americans didn't know the Japanese were intended to attack the strongest
base. Yes.
Yeah, at the strongest point of America in the Pacific. I don't want to say didn't know, but we ranked in a lower place the possibility that Hamas will conduct such a murderous attack. And you see that the soldiers, everyone on the ground were not ready. And this type of attack that the Hamas conducted is very similar to Pearl Harbor in another sense. If you succeed in the first half hour, if you catch your enemy unprepared when you start the attack, then you succeed. If there is a warning of half an hour, 2 hours before that, and the enemy deploys for a first-line defense, then you lose. Had the Americans had, for example, aircraft in the air to meet the Japanese bombers, then the Japanese couldn't bomb in a very effective manner the American ships in the harbor. They had to run away from the American aircraft. But the same is true with Gaza. For example, we had one kibbutz, where they organized very fast. They immediately understood what happened, and they organized very fast for defense. And the Hamas arrived, and they start shooting the Hamas. They killed some Hamas warriors or murderers, call them terrorists. And that's it. The kibbutz wasn't occupied, and everyone was safe. So this could have happened in other kibbutzim as well, in other places as well. But there was if we got a warning of half an hour, 2 hours before that. If you get this warning, you can also put 3, 4, 5 tanks. The tanks were there on positions, and they would shoot at the places where the Hamas tried to cut the fence or bomb the fence or do whatever it is. But there was no tank ready to do it. And
One of the surprising features in this attack, I think, for many of us, is that survivors seem to be saying it was 6, 8, 10, even 12 hours before any help could reach them. Does that suggest to you a lack of officer initiative, particularly at the middle and junior levels, in reacting and reaching the places they were needed?
Well, it's a difficult question because we don't know yet. We don't know what happened. We know that the Hamas was sophisticated. My guess is that this is the most sophisticated Arab attack in the history of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Because the Hamas knew precisely what it was doing. It blackened, blinded Israel's means of visual collection just before the war. As yesterday we learned that 3 huge balloons that Israel used to as observation posts on what happens in Gaza somehow didn't work during the weeks before the war, and now it is we start to assess that maybe the Hamas was involved here as well, and the fact that they didn't return to operation is a major Israeli failure. The Hamas also knocked out the Israeli military communication system, which is a very sophisticated system. It is defended against, protected against any cyber attack. But they didn't use cyber, they simply bombed the towers that were used for communication, and that's it. There was no communication. So the first hours, first of all, it took time to realize what happened. Then there was no communication, there was no intelligence. It took time to recover from this blow. We will learn, for example, I don't know why choppers didn't, gunships didn't intervene in the battle earlier. I don't know. It is not a matter of they were not there. They are half an hour. The base is half an hour from Gaza, but we don't know. For the time being, we don't know.
A final question, Professor. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has committed himself to a fairly grand objective, which he calls the annihilation of Hamas. Judging from recent historical events, is the annihilation of an insurgent group a realistic objective in the circumstances? Or is Israel committing itself to a painful, long ground war that could potentially turn out like another Fallujah or another Kandahar?
It's a good question. But what you have to realize is that this war started with something like 1,500 Israelis killed, massacred by the Hamas. So it is unlike any other attack in the Israeli history. Just imagine that you have a terrorist attack which kills something like 130,000 Indians in India. This is more.
No, absolutely. And if I may just add, there are many people who have not forgiven Prime Minister Manmohan Singh for sending combat jets across the line of control. Then there is a political price. His party still pays for it. Whether the decision was good or not, we can debate.
But what I'm trying to say is that this is not another round of hostilities between Israel and the Hamas like we had for the last 15 or 20 years. It is a very different ballgame. I don't know I hope that the Israeli army won't get in a mass into Gaza, because to occupy a 2 million city, I know that in Indian terms, 2 million city is not such a big deal, but in our terms, it is a huge deal. The Israeli army is not so huge. There will be lots of casualties on both sides, and primarily the main question is what happens. Let's say that we occupy Gaza and we get rid of the Hamas, annihilate the Hamas. First of all, you cannot annihilate a group or a movement like Hamas. It is very difficult. And second, what will Israel do with Gaza? Gaza is 20% of the population of Israel. You know, Israel is 10 million, Gaza is 2 million. We cannot occupy Gaza for long. It is a liability, a huge liability. So my guess is that the Israelis will do everything possible in order to destroy as much of Hamas capabilities, to destroy its capability to rule Gaza. Hamas will not be a partner for negotiations or anything like this. And it might be that the Israelis will declare that we are not ready to come to terms with Hamas and will defeat any Hamas person, even after we stop these huge bombings and this large-scale cooperation. But it will be an ongoing conflict to destroy whatever the Hamas does. I don't know which direction Israel will go. But we found ourselves in a very difficult strategic situation. I'm sure we'll get out of it.
Thank you very much for your time, Professor. And we hope your family and your loved ones and friends will stay safe as this crisis unfolds, and look forward to speaking to you again.